What do CEOs need to know about sales these days? A lot. Outdated sales strategies and tactics plague most companies today. Listen to what innovative CEOs and experts have to say about how to change all that with Sales Talk for CEOs. Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. I have a very special guest on today. This is a title I don't usually get to talk to, so I'm pretty excited. I'll tell you about that in a second. But my guest learned to code at the age of 12, simply so that he could build games. How fun is that, right? But it became a lifelong obsession for him. And now today, doing what he loves at his company, Infinite Red, with his co-founders, he's been able to build a thriving organization. Now, they're in a very special niche, so we're not going to get too technical, but we will tell you about it. And they've had a good time building this company, but of course, not without the normal bumps along the way that all of us founders have. So welcome to this show, Jamon Holmgren.
Thanks so much, Alice. Yeah, totally. This isn't my normal podcast either. Normally, normally I'm on technical podcasts talking about code, programming apps, all those things. Yeah.
That's great because I don't normally talk to CTOs, right? And so we'll try not to get too technical today, but I think it's so cool that you were willing to come on the show and talk about starting your company with your co-founders and the journey of sales from a CTO perspective. I just love it so much. And I think that it's fun to know that in your previous businesses, you did all the selling and you are still doing the selling. But before we get to that, let's just tell everybody what Infinite Red does.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a software consultancy. We're about 30 people, kind of distributed across the US. We have a couple of stragglers in Canada and one in South Korea. And, but, generally around, I think 11 states, something like that. And it's focused on a technology called React Native, which is a mobile app technology developed by Facebook. And they built it, way back in the day, probably almost 10 years ago now, which was somewhat coincidentally when we started the company. And so our journey has kind of tracked that technology. And so we're kind of known in that industry as in that particular technology as sort of the experts within that. And we picked the right horse. It's been good. A lot of big companies have adopted
because that's a very specific, very narrow niche.
This is true. We were doing just native mobile app development before that, normal iOS and Android. But this allows us to write, an app once and deploy it to both.
Wow, that's amazing. So that's what you guys are doing. And 9 years ago, the three of you got together and said, oh gosh, what's happening in the market? So tell us how that went.
Yeah, I mean, that story is pretty interesting. So I had a consultancy before that. I started when I was 23 and I was just building websites and, different things like that. And, didn't really know any better. I just kind of like dove in head first. And when I first hit, my first kind of like downturn, then I was like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I get new projects and whatnot? So I had to learn the whole sales process, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, just sort of by trial and error, which seems to be how I learn things best. But fast forwarding to 2014, 2015, I started, I met my two business partners at a technical conference in San Francisco, and we were just chatting over the next year. And in particular, my business partner, Todd Worth, who's our CEO, we were chatting a bunch, and he was like, we're having these problems, and I was having other problems that were kind of different. And eventually we started talking about merging our companies together. And then, Gant joined a little later, but he also kind of brought a very different aspect there. So what we did was we actually got together at the next conference, the next like annual conference of the one that we met at 1 year later. And this one was in Paris. And so we were in Paris, like we jokingly called it the Paris Peace Talks because our two companies were sort of like competitors, mine and Todd's, and Gant was kind of in that mix as well. And we just talked about, what it would look like to merge. And we ended up doing it. And that ended up being the same year that our core technology was released. And so that was a good time to kind of, shift the focus and move into that.
All right. Well, so there's three of you, right? And
Yeah.
you've all had your own businesses. Now you've done some selling. Had your co-founders done the selling, or how were they, fueling their business?
Not to any great scale. Todd had owned several businesses before, but it was never really his role. He was more on the technical side of things. We're all three programmers, very technical. There was also a fourth founder as well, Ken, who kind of came in the mix early as well, and then left a couple of years later. But all four of us at that time were technical and not really sales. I probably had the most sales experience simply because I had to. I was the only person running my consultancy before. But I did things very differently in that consultancy. And when we got together and we're like, okay, how do we support this now suddenly much larger organization? Because now we're merging these two teams together. I think at that time we were about 22, 23 people or something. And, mine was much smaller before that. We were like, okay, well, we have to use our strengths, and we're engineers. So let's engineer this as best we can. Like what are the principles of engineering
Right. I
here?
love it. I love it.
And it was all about like feedback loops. And,
Yeah.
I mean, they're universal. They're not just engineering, but this is how we
Sure.
kind of like connected it to what we knew. So, okay, Todd and I were going to do the sales calls, and we were going to do them together. And then after every sales call, whenever we would finish up, we would have a post meeting and we would talk about what did we do well, what did we not do well. And of course, the first ones were rough. They're not, they weren't very good. But over time we learned, and we also learned what each of us were good at. So I wasn't as good at starting, I was better kind of in the middle and closing. And Todd was much better at, putting people at ease and kind of, getting into it. He's just kind of funny and warm and just a great guy. But then he'll lose steam at a certain point, and I pick it up and go from there. And then we kind of evolved it after that. But that was kind of the initial part.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, you guys made a deliberate decision, like, here, you do this, we'll do, we'll go sell. All right, awesome. Now, how did you get into your niche? Because you
Mhm.
each were doing something a little bit different. Like you said, you were doing a little of this, a little of that, right? And then it was just a timing thing. I think had a lot to do with, which is what happens with a lot of great companies. It's a timing thing, but picking a niche that narrow is a bit scary. So tell us about how you did that.
It didn't happen all at once. We had a few other services that we were doing. We were doing kind of back-end development servers and different technologies that we were kind of bringing into this new company. So it didn't happen all at once. In fact, at one point, I think we had far too many that we were offering. But what happened was it wasn't just us that were looking for cross-platform iOS and Android, because the reality is, why would you want to build an app twice? You'd want to build it once. Most businesses would not want to spend the money to build it twice. And this allowed you to do that. And so, of course, that's why Meta liked it. That's why Facebook liked it. And then other companies, primarily startups at that point. And this is kind of part of the sales journey, because our core clients have changed over time with the technology. Like, it started out more, people with a lot, like, they were willing to take risks, and that was more startups and mid cap. And then it kind of evolved into, enterprise are starting to adopt this, and so that's now our primary clients, and we had to kind of evolve with it. But it was we were looking at it, we were going to build an app twice, and we went back to the client and said, hey, would you consider doing this technology? And at that time, they were just, there were two particular projects that were starting right about when we were going to merge the company. And so they both said yes. And then we put our best engineers on it, and we kind of blazed the trail, and it went really well. And because of that, then we started seeing it picking up steam, and it was sort of like cannibalizing our other teams, where we would need more React Native developers, and we'd move them from other teams into there and train them up and get them ready. And pretty soon we're like, okay, this is big enough that we can focus on this. The transition didn't fully finish until about 2019, 2020. So it was about, four years into it, something like that. But all along the way, you can kind of just see the trajectory. And now that's all we've been doing it for the past, 5 years. And it's been pretty great, actually.
So if someone comes to you and wants to develop something outside of that, it's called native React, right?
React Native, yeah.
React Native. Okay.
There's a web framework called React, and it's like the biggest one in the world. And this is
Okay.
just the one that does like iOS and Android.
Okay. So if they want something other, you just turn them away.
That's right. Yeah. What I say in our sales calls is, if the project has the name React Native somewhere in it, then we're very interested and we're probably very good at it. If it doesn't, then we're just, we're not the right fit. And that clarifies things so much. Like, it clarifies not just that, but hiring and training and marketing and everything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I've said it a million times, the riches are in the niches, and anyone who tries to deviate from that, they're all over the place. It's hard to have your marketing messaging right. It's hard to train everybody. There's just so many things, right? When we focus, which can be scary, because like, what do you mean we're going to turn away business? Yeah, you're going to turn away business because you're going to only take the business that's best for you, that you can do the best on, so that people will just brag about you out there, and you'll have all this word of mouth, right? All this word of mouth coming in. So we're going to talk more about that in a second. All right. So during the early days, what were some of the bumps? You mentioned, when we first went on sales calls, like, we didn't know what we were doing, and we would come back and debrief and go, that wasn't so great. So what were some of the bumps along the way that you guys had to deal with, being the three of you merging, now having a much bigger company than any one of you had individually, and some of the things, especially around sales, that you had to deal with?
I think it was both being new to it, as well as, obviously the size, but also the fact that we were also getting used to being co-founders together and business partners. And so we didn't know each other very well. We didn't know how, we would react in certain cases. We didn't have good communication mechanisms, those types of things. And so, someone would just say something that after the call would be like, that wasn't even true, I don't think, right? Like, that's wrong. And and so, it would just, and then we would have a lot of kind of awkward, talk over each other moments, and our stories didn't line up, our narrative didn't line up, our one person would just keep trying to sell after the other person clearly saw they're sold. We just need to move to closing, all these things that are
past the close. Gotta love it.
exactly. Yeah, this was something that we realized after a while. Okay, the person who's not talking is observing, and let's have a little chat, not in the video call, but outside, in Slack, open to the side, where we can be like, I think they're sold, or whatever, and just kind of have a little shaping of the experience for the client. And there's also things like I mentioned about, I'm just not great at opening. I've gotten better at it, but I'm just not as good as Todd. Todd's just great at it. And so let him go do that thing. And my ability to close, he just wasn't really getting there. And so we would know kind of the moment where, eventually where to do that. But before that, it was just sort of stepping on each other's toes a lot. And yeah, just, I don't know. We somehow made it work, but despite ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. And then, the company gets bigger, and you've got all this word of mouth coming in. We're talking about how you generate leads in a minute. And you've got to run your company as well as sell. So was there a point, it's been 9 years now. It's somewhere in the last couple of years, you said, it kind of didn't everything firm up maybe till 19. Now you've been selling together for a while. You know each other better. Lots of things are going right. Where did you start thinking, should we get some help for sales? Maybe we need a sales assistant to help us, or maybe we need somebody to sell for us. Like, where did that thought come into your mind?
Yeah, it was, I think, I don't have the exact timing in mind, but I think it was around 2018, 2019 that we eventually got a sales coordinator, where essentially the job was all of the stuff that was like email, just the initial responses, a lot
The
of
sales admin stuff.
yes,
Getting the
exactly.
appointments booked, making sure people show up, taking the notes or getting the notes afterwards and doing all the follow-up
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
See, and us not being professional salespeople, we didn't understand, that this was just a normal thing. We had to kind of like come up with this stuff on our own,
Yeah. Right. You should
and
have had an assistant all along, but that's okay.
we
Now you
should
finally
have.
got one.
Absolutely, we should have. It just made no sense for us to be doing all that stuff and sending follow-ups and all these things, founders of the company that have plenty of other responsibilities. And what would happen before we had that was when we're busy, then the sales stuff just would not really get the attention that it needed. So then it led to this sort of boom and bust cycle, which was
Yes.
not great. And I'm sure this is a common story on your podcast
So
where,
common. Yes.
oh yeah, you put time into it when you need the work, and then you don't when you don't, but then that kind of doesn't
Then
line
it's
up.
too late because then your
Yeah.
job's all ended. And you're like, oh no. So it's like you're always pedaling as fast as you can to get up the
Yeah.
hill. And then you get up the
So
hill
true.
and then you just stop pedaling and you go, and it's
Yes.
like, oh no. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it took us a while to learn that lesson, but yeah, we got a sort of admin style person at first, and then when she left a couple of years later, we took a look at it, and we actually had a software. Now this is like you don't generally turn software engineers into developers. If you're a founder, then you kind of have to. But in this case, this was a software developer who had some skills that we thought would be really useful there and was looking for a change. And so we put him into that position. He ended up being excellent. We of course still had to train him, but he's been in the industry for 20 some years. He knows it inside and out. He worked on plenty of React Native projects, so he knew the technology really well. But we knew that wouldn't necessarily change the fact that we still needed a founder in the call, because
Right.
it's just like, for us, it's super super critical. So Todd kind of dropped off of those calls, and it was just me and Derek, the sales coordinator now. And we do the same thing though that Todd and I did, where it's like we still do the critique afterward. I do more of the talking, but he's taking notes, and there's still parts of that we kind of engineer into the process where I'll say, Derek, when is the next scheduling meeting, or do you have any questions? And he kind of comes in with his pre-made questions. Those moments are still baked into the process, but we've kind of refined it for that. Now that has changed this year, and we can talk about that, but that happened for probably 4 years, something like that. And that's basically how we ran it during that time. He also kind of revamped a few things. He implemented a CRM, which, we were kind of doing things kind of ad hoc before, spreadsheets and whatever else. And now we have a CRM, and it works the way we like to work, where it's kind of integrated into Gmail, and we have, data that we can kind of dig through and whatnot. So he kind of brought some more systematic and rigor to the approach that allowed us to kind of scale up a bit.
And that's his kind of engineer developer background.
Yeah,
So
totally.
he's process driven and he wants a process to put everything in. That's
Right.
why I love that. And that's why he did make a really great sales coordinator as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get back to what you're doing today in a minute, but 9 years in, you're still doing founder-led sales. And this is important because a lot of CEOs are wondering about it, right? And I've talked to a lot of CEOs lately who went away from founder-led sales and then came back to it. Because a lot of people think, oh, you're 9 years in, you're 5 years in, whatever years you're in, the founder shouldn't be doing the selling anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's not a truth we should cling to anymore, right? I think there's a balance, right? I always say the CEO will always have a role in sales. The senior leaders will always have a role in sales, but that role changes as the company matures. And it may ebb and flow as well, right? So it's interesting that you are still doing founder-led sales and that it's really working for your company as well. So tell us a little bit about why.
Yeah, totally. It feels like, especially, I think it also coincides with us moving, up market into more enterprise level clients, where
Right.
I feel
So
like,
pause on that. Enterprise
yeah,
level clients are 100 to 1,000 times your size.
this is
right?
right. Yeah, this is
And
correct.
so now you're thinking this humongous company is going to buy from this tiny little company.
Yeah.
We've got to do something to make them confident.
That's right. Yeah, we do have to inspire that confidence and that trust, because we are we're not we're more expensive because we have like all senior level, high level. I mean, our average professional experience for among our developers is 15 years, and that's just unheard of in our industry. Like most, it's like 5. And so because of that, they're coming to us for very specific, highly, specialized expert level consulting because they have a very important project that can't go wrong, and they're adopting a new technology, and this new technology can't fail. And so by hiring us, they know that that part's taken care of. They can kind of check it off, but they need to have that trust going into it. And we do a lot of things to establish that trust through, all the marketing that we do. But definitely our first Zoom call with them, when we're sitting across from them, they need to feel like we really understand not only the technology. I can put any developer in there and they'll talk to them about the technology, but how that technology relates to their business. And honestly, really the founders, those are the ones that really understand that kind of connection between the two.
Yeah.
And so that's I think been something that we've kicked around, like, of course, who wants to keep doing, I've been doing it for 19 years, like it's just okay, it's enough, like I'd rather do something else. But it's the lifeblood of our company, and we need to make sure that we put the right amount of time into it. But like you said, it does evolve, and I think we've evolved it in a very good way over time, where it's not I'm not sitting there sending follow-ups to, semi-warm leads. That's probably not something I should be doing.
Absolutely not. And I think that's the key. When we say founder led sales, I don't mean that you're the one doing the cold calling and all the prospecting, right? I mean that you're the one who's doing the pieces that you're best at. And
That's
I
right.
think that's important. So that should kind of take us right into what are you doing today? Because you've made a change recently. So let's
Yeah.
hear about that.
So the other founder of our company, Gant, he has led projects and done different things throughout his career. Um, and it's so funny in retrospect to look back at this, but you know, his dad was like an award-winning salesman for his whole career. And Gant himself, if you were to meet him, you'd think this guy's a natural salesman, but we never put him in that position. He was always technical. He was always doing, and that was what he was interested in at the time. But I would bring him in to sales calls from time to time, and he'd do great. And eventually, I'm like, okay. I talked to Derek, and I'm like, do you think Gant could start leading some of these? Because I had some other interests and some things that we needed to do, especially in the lead generation side of things, that were kind of being neglected, and I felt like I could add a lot of value over there. And Derek's like, yeah, Gant's great every time that we do this. And so earlier this year, I asked Gant, are you interested? And he was interested, but he had some other things on his plate that would kind of take him some time to get off. And so we sort of just integrated him into the process and made sure he was part of the conversations and in sales calls, but sort of as a secondary, not really leading the conversation. And then after his responsibilities were kind of wrapped up, we moved to more of a, okay, now start taking the lead a little bit here on some of these things. And I remember that first sales call where he took over and he goes in there, and I'm taking notes because I want to make sure I give him good feedback. This is, Gant's great about taking feedback, and he wanted that. And so we did this call. There were some rough edges. It wasn't perfect. I could have probably done a better job. And then we ended the call and we went into the post, and I said, Gant, I can give you 1 or 2 of these. I have like 14, but I can give you 1 or 2 of these and we can work on those. He's like, nope, give me all 14. And so I gave them all to him. I sent him the list, and I said, it sounds nitpicky, but these are just things I noticed. The next sales call, I'm doing the same thing, and I'm listening to him talk, and I'm listening to him kind of do this. And I had 2 things. He had fixed 12 of the things. So, okay, I gave him those 2 things afterward. The next sales call, I didn't have any feedback, and I was just, why didn't we understand we had this talent years ago? I mean, this took me and Todd years to get to that point, and he picked it up in no time. So it really felt like a good fit. And then over time, we're still in transitioning, through the end of the year, but he's doing a fantastic job with that. And I give him a big list of things that I wish that the sales, organization could have achieved that I wasn't able to do myself. And he's just like, oh, I got this, and he's going to move that forward.
Well, I think there's some symmetry here between app developing or building things the way that you all do and sales. Do you kind of see that in as you watch each other sell and, coming from the backgrounds that you do?
Yes, and I don't think that's an accident. It's because that's what we know, and we're going to bring those skills and those habits, I guess, to what we do at the sales side. Whether it works well or not, we kind of iterate and try to figure out what works and what
But
doesn't.
that's how you build
Yeah,
an app, right? And the
it is.
feedback
Yeah,
loop on an app is so important, right?
that's
So
right.
I love that I see all these similarities and you're using the things you're strong at to get better at sales.
Exactly. I mean, I just kind of felt like maybe we didn't have any other choice at the time. We just weren't trained in this stuff. I mean, I've read, sales books and tried to kind of be connected to it, but it was just sort of a necessity thing. But I do see a lot of parallels. There are a lot. I mean, you wouldn't think so. Like, sales is a very like human centric thing, and then engineering, you think like computers, right? Well, the reality is with consulting, the vast majority of what we do is still human centric. It's there's a lot of tech and we need to make sure that we're good at the tech, but most of the like really tough problems that we encounter, they're tough problems not really because of the tech. They're tough problems because of organizational dysfunction or just challenges that they have. Those are the types of things we have to navigate. And so we've learned these skills over time, and it does feel a lot like the stuff you have to do in sales.
Well, and humans are going to use the tech. So the people building the tech always have to think, how is the human going to use this? Will they see the button? Will they know what to do next? How will we prompt them to do what they do next? Right. So it really is a very human element that you're used to, plus just the process that you use and the feedback loops are perfect for sales.
I agree. Yeah, I was talking to my brother yesterday, and he works for like a home builder, and they're adopting a new software system. And he was talking about how the consultant comes in and is setting it up and showing them how to use this, and some of the things that he is showing them how to do are just so broken and
Yeah.
not designed for the user. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm embarrassed for this person. Like, we do need to be more human centric. We need to be thinking about these things impact real people day to day. I mean, he says, their current software crashes 5 times a day.
Ugh,
And it's just something that they've dealt with for years.
painful.
This,
So
yeah.
painful.
So, how many people at that company are dealing with this every single day? That we have to be
So
thinking human.
it's so inefficient and makes your people unproductive and makes them not want to do things and be in a bad mood and all of that other stuff. So that is crazy. Yeah. That is embarrassing. Anyway, moving on from that to, all right, let's talk about lead generation. So how are you generating leads and how does the podcast fit into
Mhm,
that? Because you have a podcast,
mhm.
which is the same name, right? It's as your
React Native Radio. Yeah, that's correct.
React Native Radio.
Mhm.
All right. So, what's the lead generation look like, and how does that fit in?
So we used to rely a lot on open source software. So we would put out software on a website called GitHub, which is kind of where you know coders kind of collaborate on code. And it was very much like we'd put something interesting out there. We might talk about it at a conference and get people interested in using it. Once they started using it, they would usually hit some other limit and then reach out to us, and then we would help them with their projects. And that was really a good strategy for more startup style projects and whatnot. But over time, that started not working as well, just simply because we were moving up market. And we also had like, it was just kind of an evolution of where we were. And so we had to start thinking about other ways to start marketing. Now I have a fairly decent like social media presence within our developer community. People tend to know me. We tend to go to, the right conferences and things like that and try to give talks and sponsor and have a booth there. And these things have all been helpful, but they stopped being as they didn't grow with the organization. And about 2 years ago, it started becoming a little bit of an issue because I think 2021 and 2022 for tech were just boom years. Like you could sell a project with it was so easy. Like people were clamoring to get on our schedule. And then 2023, early 2023, it just kind of the bottom dropped out for us. And there started being, like tech layoffs I think it lines up with a lot of other industries as well. And this year also started out pretty poorly. So this was part of this transition from me to Gant for the sales side so that I could focus on lead generation. And I went and kind of revamped it. I built a new strategy. We never really had like a cohesive strategy, but I built a strategy around, who are target clients, like who do we really want to do work for? What are our best projects? And then also, like, what about us resonates with them? What types of things, what's our value proposition? The fact that we're like smaller than most of our competitors, but like super high level expert, if you hire one of our competitors, yeah, they have 200, 300, 500 people in their consultancy, but there's a lot of junior level people. There's a lot of mid-level people. You're going to get just kind of a random, group of developers. And so why don't I kind of focus on our strengths, the fact that we're all US and we're high level and everything, and then get the word out there. And so I've built up some, relationships with some tech influencers. Those are actually a thing. There's tech influencers where they talk about code, and they have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that follow them. And so I was able to set up some kind of key partnerships and sponsorships, and sort of ad campaigns with those. We'd never done that before.
Yeah,
Those
some
ended up being pretty
influencer
good.
marketing. I think when you're in a very narrow niche,
Yeah.
influencer marketing works really well. It doesn't work when it's broad because that influencer only can influence a subset of people. They don't influence everyone, right?
This is
So,
so true. It's so
yeah.
true.
So I think it's a very good way to, when you have a narrow niche like you do, this
Yeah.
influencer marketing. Okay, what else are you doing?
So I just went back to the basics. Went back to our website doesn't represent us very well. Like, let's go fix that. I mean, we our top SEO term, we weren't in the top 10 pages. I don't even understand how, but we weren't even on Google for that. So I put some time into SEO, and we actually last week we just got a lead for my efforts there. That was pretty nice because we're now number one. We're number one and for that search term. This is just basics. These are things that everybody should do. I went through all of our social media, you know, like brand profiles and made sure that these were reflecting us. And by me saying that, I went through and identified, and then often it was Justin Husky, who's our director of communications, who would come in and kind of work, to make it look. He has a background in design. You don't want a developer like making
Yeah,
these
no.
things. It's going to look terrible. And so he would make everything look great. It would align with our messaging. It would align with our branding. We activated more on things like LinkedIn, where we weren't as active. That sounds weird probably to other industries, but most of our developer community is on Twitter. And so
Yeah.
that's where we were. But that's kind of changing, and so we need to move into other areas. We did, just a whole bunch of those types of things. We invested more into our own podcast. And you asked about our podcast. That's been fantastic for us. Main thing is that it's primarily about our niche, service, and they're listening to a 45-minute ad for Infinite Red in a lot of ways. I mean, we're not doing that. Like we're very careful about not doing that. But you're listening to the CTO, the director of engineering, and one of our senior software engineers talk about React Native. Eventually, if you're in that market, you're going to probably know about us and recommend us. And I think that kind of goes to our broader strategy, which is we're very ground up. Like, we're not necessarily going towards CTOs or CEOs. What we're trying to do is get a lot of the other developers, like the web developers, the native mobile developers, to understand that we're good at this tech. So then when their boss comes to them and says, hey, we need a new app, what do you want to use? And they say, well, we should probably use React Native because we're using React on the web side. So why not use React Native? Okay, can you do that? No, I don't have time, boss. You got me doing this other thing, right? Okay, who do we hire? And then that's the moment where you want to come up.
Yeah, I love that. So word of mouth from the people who do the work
Mhm.
up the chain of command to the people who pay for the work, right? To get to hire you. Love that.
Yeah, their word, the engineer's word, kind of means something in that situation, and so we
Yeah,
want to look good to them.
love that. And what about referrals from your existing customers, people who you've done a great job for?
It definitely happens. It was it was plenty for me when I was, a solo founder. It didn't scale out to, to the level where it could by itself support us. But it is an aspect. It's still part of our strategy. It's still something that we very much value, and where some of our best clients have come from, for sure.
So let me ask you, do you have a formal referral selling strategy at your company?
We don't. That's probably something I should work on in 2025.
Right? So, I mean, in other words, if someone happens to call you
Mhm.
and say, "Hey, I got, somebody here interested, let me make an introduction." You're like, "Great,
Mhm.
yay," right? But if that doesn't happen, how are you getting referrals from them?
It's a lot of times, again, people talking to their friends and, kind of lamenting about various problems, or they, oh, hey, we're trying this React Native. I don't think it's that good because we're running into all these problems. And they say, well, it's actually working great for us. Maybe you should hire these people that we're using, is sort of the kind of the way that it comes across. But yeah, it's we don't have anything formal, and that's something we
Yeah.
probably need to improve.
So you can make that happen more often by putting in a formal referral selling process, which says when we've completed a project and people are delighted, we just simply ask them, are there other departments at their own company, or do they have, friends, neighbors, vendors, other people that they know that you should talk to, right?
Yeah,
And making that
we
part
talked
of the
about this.
process.
Totally. Yeah. And we talked about this sort of concept. We even just kind of joked that, it's like A to Z sales. This is the back end of the project. This is Zales.
Yeah.
and, um, and it is something that for sure would be, I think, very important for us. We do get a lot of internal referrals. We do projects for big companies, some of the biggest in the world, and they tend to fill up our schedule because, yeah, word gets around. But we should have something more formal. I appreciate this free consulting I'm getting from you.
Well, it just occurred to me as you were saying, like, wow,
Right.
you're not taking advantage of that, right?
You can't help but nerd out about this stuff, right, Alice?
Right, exactly. It's what I love. But here's what I think, it's great that people love you enough to call you up out of the blue and give you a referral, right? But it's not their job to sit around all day thinking, oh, who can I give Jamon a referral today? That's not what they're doing, right? But if you mention it to them and they go, oh, yeah, yeah, so and so was just talking about that the other day, like you want to keep it top of mind. So when their friends are lamenting and complaining, it's more likely that they're going to just, say, oh, Infinite, you know,
Yeah,
um, just call
absolutely.
Infinite, right? They're
Yeah.
gonna do it, right? So
Yeah, that's a
I
good point.
think that you just want to prompt that a little bit somehow
Yeah.
and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. What's funny right now is because my lead generation, like, work has been so effective, most of our clients are asking us for more developers, and we don't have them. And we purposely kind of cap the size of our company. We just, for various reasons. And it's kind of funny, like going to them and asking them to refer right now. It's kind of, they would probably be like, well, we'll take more.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yes, that's a good point though. I like this sort of systematic approach where you have a lever to pull. Like you have this sort of thing that you can run, and you're just always going to be generating leads.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and some people might have to wait for you to do their project, but that's
Hmm.
okay too.
That's
All
right.
right, listen, this has been so fun and love that I got to talk to a CTO. Awesome. So we're going to round out the show. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And the first one is, what is a book that you think every CEO or company leader like yourself should read?
I can't recommend Culture Code enough. One of the things that we do a lot at Infinite Red is we focus on our culture. That's we want people to. We honestly want to build a company that people would want to retire at, and that's very hard in tech. So we really, it's really about that psychological safety and team trust and collaboration and things like that. It has just amazing lessons in it. I felt like I got value out of every page. It was just amazing. I should really read it again. It's been a couple years. And I I recently picked up the kind of venerable 21 Immutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell, and started reading again. It'd been like 20 years, and it really hit home so much more than it did 20 years ago before I owned my own business, because so many of these laws, I was like, yeah, this is so correct. This is so real to me. I learned it kind of the hard way in a lot of cases, but these are real and actual, and they for sure make a difference. So those two books for sure, they're kind of probably well-known books, but I think everybody should have read those two.
Yeah, great choices. Next question. What is a podcast you love because it makes you think differently?
I have an absolute favorite for this one, and I listen to it when I'm mowing my lawn because I don't have a commute. We're remote. So I'm sitting on my lawnmower and I'm listening to this podcast every single time. And it's called The Leadership Podcast, and it's by Jan Rutherford and my friend Jim Vasilopoulos. And they are, oh man, those two are just fantastic. They have great interviews of industry leaders. They talk about leadership in particular. There's of course great sales leaders on there, so definitely check that out if you're interested in the sales aspects. But it always makes me think differently. I always get something out of it that when I'm I kind of joke that like I get done mowing my lawn and I'm like messaging my business partners always, like there's some idea, something that we can tweak, and a lot of that stuff we've incorporated into Infinite Red over the years. I just thought about this. I have fewer ideas during the winter when I'm not mowing my lawn. So
there you go. Well, so you're going to have to find another way. But I love that. That's great. All right, last question. What does every CEO or founder, company leader need to know to win in this market?
I think that the lesson that keeps getting drilled into my head over and over and over is that you need to hire well. You really need to hire well. If you don't hire well, you're already behind. And then you need to get to know your team individually as well as you can. And then you need to invest in them. And I think that, the less that you do yourself and the more that you can invest into them, the more that you're able to achieve together. Because I have a lot of blind spots and things I'm not good at, and those types of things. And really, our focus has to be on the very, very key parts of the business, which includes sales, founder-led sales. I totally agree with, but we won't have time to do that if we're doing everything else. And so hiring super, super well, making sure that they're the right people, they'll take you to levels that you didn't even think you could get to. I mean, that's been our experience for sure. And then investing in them, spending time with them. That's actually something that is very hard to do. It's like harder than most people. Actually, I would say most leaders do this poorly, where they don't spend enough
totally
time.
Agree.
Yeah. Spend enough time with their people.
They don't prioritize it. They don't get it on their calendar, and they definitely don't spend enough time. I agree with you.
And it's a lot of times artificial, and it's not like, sitting down and just figuring out a problem with one of your people and investing in them, making sure that they kind of understand how in the future they could do this in a way that, is like more self-sufficient. Like you have to do that. And that's, I think over the last 2 years, the thing that I have done the most poorly is that, there's been a lot going on. But 2025, I just today told my team what my priorities are. And that's one of them is, just having the time to sit down and talk with them and learn them. Because once I know what people are good at and what they're not, I can put them in positions where they thrive, and I don't have to babysit them. I don't have to push them. They're pushing me.
Yeah. Isn't that a great place to be? I love that. Well, I love your commitment to doing more of that in 2025. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I've learned a lot about app development here, technical stuff. It's all good. Thank you for sharing your story. And where can people find you?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Alice. This is like, it's a very different thing than I normally do. Of course, I could talk your ear off about all the technical aspects, but you can find me on our company website, infinite.red. And of course, you can, check out what we do. It's better now. I put some time into it this year, so that's good. And if you reach out, I'm going to see your email, still. And of course, Gant and Derek, you'll be talking to them. And then also you can find me on my personal website, jamon.dev, which is, it's so funny. You mentioned at the beginning that I learned to code when I was 12. The technology I used back then was called QBasic, and it was a very, very old system. This website is actually running on QBasic. I somehow got it to work, and I'm very proud of that.
Oh my
So it's
goodness.
running 30, 40, whatever, I don't know how long, 30 some year technology right now running that website.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you again for being on the show. And I'm going to look forward to keeping in touch with you and learning about how your company grows. And I definitely want to hear if you implement a formal referral selling process so that you are actually proactively asking for introductions to people. And let's see how that works.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Alice.
If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.